Once seen, she was impossible to forget. She had such an extraordinary personality that her presence had an effect on those around her. She entered the Academy of Fine Arts at the age of 19, which was unprecedented in Turkey at that time. One of the most interesting details of her life was the almost ruthless rivalry between her and her son, who was a painter. Characters in television series often undergo significant changes, even if they are inspired by real life. I want to tell the life of Fahrelnissa Zeid in all its nakedness. First of all, let me state, the real name of our heroine is Fahrelnissa. However, she adopted the name Fahrelnissa in later periods and signed her works in this way. Fahrelnissa Zeid was a mysterious and reserved woman. Those who met her either respected her greatly and preferred to keep a certain distance, or they disliked her. Her unexpected outbursts, harsh criticism, and occasional uncontrollable nervous breakdowns made her difficult to be with. Her son Rod even said that he could only get to know his mother better by studying her paintings. This was quite interesting. A person knew his mother, the closest person in his life, through her work. Fahrelnissa Zeid was an extraordinary figure in her life and art. She was born in 1901 in an ornate three-story mansion in Büyükada. Her father, Kaba Agaçlı Mehmet Şakir Paşa, was an Ottoman historian and statesman. Her grandfather was Miralay Mustafa Asim Bey, the head of the military council. Her uncle was Cevat Pasha, one of the grand viziers of the period. She grew up in a large and well-established family. However, one of the most dramatic stories within the family was that her older brother, Yevat Şakir, became a patricide in his later years. Art had an important place in her life very early on. Violin, piano, painting, and foreign language lessons were constantly given at Şakir Paşa Mansion. Growing up in such an environment, little Fahrelnissa found herself in a life intertwined with art at an early age. At that time, her older brother, who had left his studies at Oxford to study painting at the Academy of Fine Arts in Rome, was the first to recognize Fahrenissa's talent. When she was only 8 years old, a portrait painted by her brother in China ink laid the foundation for her connection with art. However, despite growing up surrounded by art, it was impossible to escape the tensions within the family. This turbulent period marked the beginning of a period that deeply affected not only Fahrelnissa, but the whole family. In 1913, when her brother married a woman he had met in Italy and impregnated and brought her to Istanbul, the already strained family relations became even more difficult. As the distance between him and his father increased, rumors made the atmosphere even worse. Rumors claimed that his father might have gotten close to his daughter-in-law. The year 1914 saw an irrevocable event. During an argument with his father, a bullet from the young man's gun killed his father. Following this incident, the court sentenced him to 15 years in the galleys. This tragedy left an indelible mark on the family history and irrevocably changed Fahrelnissa's life in particular. Many different claims have been made over the years about the background to this incident. Some suggested that there were financial interests behind the murder, while others believed it was an accident. Some rumors claimed that his father's relationship with his daughter-in-law added to the tension. However, all these allegations never came to a definitive conclusion, and the real face of the incident remained in the dark. When this tragedy happened, Fahrelnissa was only 13 years old and in one of the most fragile periods of her life. The loss of her father deeply affected her mental health. Her nervous disorders, the first symptoms of which appeared during this period, would become so severe in the following years that they would occasionally put her to bed. She withdrew into herself and developed a harsh and rigid attitude. However, this harshness was directed not only at her environment, but also at herself, so much so that these internal conflicts would wear her down physically and mentally throughout her life. When the years passed and the war period began, Fahrelnissa voluntarily applied to the Academy of Fine Arts. This institution, now known as Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University, was a place where women had never been educated at that time. She made history as one of its first female students. The public reaction was swift. What was a young, beautiful woman doing in such a school? Was it acceptable for a girl to study higher education? While such questions swirled around, nothing was more important to Fahrelnissa than painting. Even though she received marriage proposals, she was determined to forge her own path, focusing only on her art. The young artist, who commuted every day from Buyukada to the academy in Babiali, continued her education with determination. She achieved great success at the academy, especially in the fields of drawing and perspective. The marriage proposals continued. Her mother was determined to meticulously plan her daughter's future, scrutinizing every step. Fahrelnissa's father had passed away, and her brother was in prison. Her mother, Mrs. Sar Ismet, wanted the young artist's husband to be handsome and well-versed in Western culture. In line with her mother's expectations, she married Eset Meli Devrim, one of the writers of the magazine Servet-i Funun, in 1919, when she was attending the Academy of Fine Arts. Her new husband became the new father of the house and took charge of the family, but he was experiencing difficulties. In Paris, where she went for her honeymoon, Fahrelnissa had an in-depth introduction to the art world. The museums and galleries of Paris brought her face-to-face with Western art, and this experience was an important step in developing her artistic vision. She had 2 children with her husband, a painter and a theater artist. However, a problematic relationship would develop between them, especially with her son. Together with her husband, Fahrelnissa visited different cities in Europe and had the opportunity to meet important intellectuals of the time. In 1928, supported by her first husband, she enrolled at the Academy in Paris. At this academy, she had the chance to meet the famous painter Roger Bissière in particular, and the experiences in Bissière's studio profoundly influenced her understanding of art. One day, Fahrelnissa, proud of her realistic study of the model, faced harsh criticism from Bissière. Bissière did not like her drawing, threw it on the ground, and told her sternly, "You are not a photographer. You should never imitate nature." This event became a turning point in her artistic life. Bissière's words caused Fahrelnissa to make her art more abstract. When the director of the atelier asked Bissière the reason for this harsh attitude, the artist's answer was quite striking. "This woman is very talented, but she plays with painting as a socialite. If she were a poor artist, she would have to earn a living with her art, and she would already be well known. I have to criticize her harshly for her own good." These words would have a significant impact on Fahrelnissa's artistic journey and lead her down a more authentic path. After returning to Turkey, Fahrelnissa continued her studies at the Academy of Fine Arts at the Namık Ismail Workshop. While she was determined to continue developing her art, family problems became unbearable for Fahrelnissa. Her mother-in-law and sister-in-law watched Fahrelnissa's withdrawn attitude and sometimes incomprehensible behavior with discomfort. One witness described how when Fahrelnissa was painting, onlookers would see her talking to herself all the time, waving her brush as if fighting with the canvas. This behavior of hers frightened the people around her. They could not communicate with her for hours during the painting process. While she had disagreements with her mother-in-law and sister-in-law, she also had deep divisions and disagreements with her husband. Mr. Meli was caught between both sides. Fahrelnissa could not sustain the marriage. They divorced. Fahrelnissa's second marriage took place in 1934 with Emir Zeid, the representative of Iraq in Ankara and brother of King Faisal of Iraq. It was this marriage that led to the artist's surname Zeid. Emir Zeid was a loving and respectful husband who supported Fahrelnissa's artistic career. Even during the artist's nervous breakdowns, when she was unable to get out of bed for months at a time, Emir Zeid treated her with great tolerance and stood by her side. A son, Rod, was born to this marriage in 1936. Fahrelnissa left Turkey due to her diplomat husband's assignment and continued her painting career in various European cities. During her ambassadorial duties in Berlin and London, she continued her artwork and held exhibitions. This process offered her the opportunity to combine both Eastern and Western cultures. When they lived in Baghdad, Fahrelnissa, who was 37 years old at the time, couldn't stand the monotonous life of the city and decided to go to Paris and started living there. She then traveled back and forth between London and Paris, setting up studios in both cities and building a community of young artists around her. Fahrelnissa Zeid continued her artistic career in various European cities. In 1944, she held her first solo exhibition at her home in Istanbul. Many people were against Fahrelnissa's decision to open an exhibition in her home. Criticisms such as, "No one would come here. What kind of an exhibition is an exhibition at home?" were raised. However, Fahrelnissa was determined and moved all the furniture in the house to storage. When the exhibition opened, contrary to expectations, it met with great interest. Perhaps Fahrelnissa was even surprised to see that her own exhibition attracted so much attention. The house was located at the last stop of the tram, that is, in a rather remote area of the city. Nevertheless, many people from schools and different parts of the city came to the exhibition. This exhibition marked the beginning of Fahrelnissa's recognition in the art world. This first exhibition in Istanbul was followed by exhibitions in important art centers of the world, such as Paris, London, New York, and Brussels. Those who witnessed Fahrelnissa's life said that she was an extraordinary person, and that once you saw her, you would never forget her. Her demeanor, behavior, and personality fascinated people. This is also reflected in the video recordings of her in her old age. Fahrelnissa Zeid lived in Iraq for a while because her husband, Prince Zaid, was the deputy king of Iraq. Fahrelnissa, who never gave up her art during this period, continued to produce during the years she spent in Iraq. Fahrelnissa's understanding of life was unconventional. Her daughter, Şirin Devrim, had married a wealthy man and was living a comfortable life in her large seaside house in Erenköy. However, instead of praising her daughter's opulent life, Fahrelnissa said the following words to her: "Is this what I raised you for?" Because money was of no importance to Fahrelnissa. What mattered to her was what she contributed to art and her productivity. Nejat Melih Devrim, Fahrelnissa Zeid's son, lived a life intertwined with art, just like his mother. Nejat's life was full of interesting things worth discovering. Theater actress Şirin Devrim and painter Nejat Devrim had difficulties communicating with their mother. In an interview, Şirin stated that her brother turned to art in order to gain his mother's attention. Nejat Devrim left his education at Galatasaray High School and entered the academy to become a student of the famous French painter Léopold Lévy. He won the scholarship exam in Paris and settled in Paris in 1946. However, the way he went to Paris is quite remarkable. Nejat, who had lived in luxury until then, traveled to France under extremely difficult conditions as an anonymous passenger on the deck of a ship, with no number and no room. The journey from Istanbul to Marseille took 7 days, while the train from Marseille to Paris took about 12 hours. This was a great hardship for someone who had lived a life of luxury. After World War II, a renewal movement had begun in France. Paris had become a center where artists flocked to. In the 1950s, Nejat Devrim held exhibitions in prestigious galleries in France, Italy, and other European countries. In a short time, Nejat established close relations with art circles and established a solid place for himself in the art world. 3 years later, his mother came to Paris. Nejat provided her with opportunities to meet art circles. He introduced her to critics, art galleries, and paved the way for her in terms of art in Paris. Everything was going well, but then it suddenly went sour. Nejat decides to marry a woman. Fahrelnissa Zeid opposes this marriage. We don't know exactly why, but his mother's opposition to the marriage deeply affected the relationship between the two, and the bond between them was broken. Nejat marries despite his mother's opposition, and this becomes a major turning point in the lives of the two artists. Fahrelnissa Zeid entered a very productive period artistically and opened many exhibitions. She does not have any financial difficulties because her husband supports her. Nejat, on the other hand, tries to live off the money he earns from his art and sometimes struggles half hungry and half full. Nejat, who has achieved a lot in the field of art, is still unhappy. He feels that he has not found the place he deserves both in Turkey and with his family. I think the reason behind this unhappiness is his cold relationship with his mother. This distant relationship with his mother was part of the deep gaps in his personal life. Both of them had lived in Paris, but their relationship with each other had never been warm. There is an open rivalry between them, and both argue that they are better painters. Nejat Devrim even rejects his mother's art and makes a harsh statement such as, "I would not accept her as a painter." This strong emotional distance between the two artists continued until the end of Nejat's life. Nejat settled in Poland in the early 1990s, where he spent the last years of his life. Let's talk about the person who influenced Fahrelnissa's whole life, Cevat Şakir Fahrelnissa Zeid's older brother spent most of his life in hardship and loneliness, in a process that began when he contracted tuberculosis while serving his sentence at a young age, and was released. Cevat Şakir, whose family and friends had turned their backs on him and who was seen as a patricide, turned to the life of a techie for a while. During this period, he remained alone in Istanbul, took refuge in lodges, worshipped, and tried to purify his soul. However, this period of seclusion did not last long. He returns to the world of the press, writes articles, and draws cartoons. In 1925, his article titled, "Why Do Those Sentenced to Death in Prison Go to Hanging on Purpose?" puts him in a difficult situation again. He is tried by the Independence Court and exiled to Bodrum. But he loves Bodrum very much. Bodrum becomes almost like a reward for him, not an exile. After the end of his sentence, he returned to Bodrum. Cevat Şakir spent the last years of his life in Izmir and passed away in 1973 due to bone cancer. The writer, who was 83 years old when he passed away, was buried in Bodrum upon his will. Fahrelnissa Zeid hugged the rock that stood at her brother's grave instead of a tombstone and cried, "Oh, my brother, my brother!" she cried. This was one of the most sincere reactions to the calamities that had befallen them. After losing her husband in 1970, Miss Fahrelnissa moved to Amman in 1976 to join her son, Rod. Here she, an art institute bearing her name, Fahrelnissa Zeid, passed away in Amman in 1991 and was buried next to her husband, Emir Zeid, in the Royal Cemetery of Al Ragdan Palace. Fahrelnissa's son, Nejat Devrim, passed away in Poland in 1995, 4 years after his mother's death. She grew up in a house full of scandals and lived a life of art. She lived an embittered life with her son because of her rivalry. She became a princess and was buried in the royal cemetery. Fahrelnissa Zeid is one of Turkey's most successful and sensational figures, the focus of both admiration and criticism for her character and life. What do you think about the series? Write me your comments.
You can subscribe to my channel for new videos. Take good care of yourself. I'm sending you a big kiss.